John Graham joins me on episode 81 of our Finding Better podcast. We're going to talk about his incredible life as he spent decades traveling the world as a war correspondent, looking for meaning in his life. And he finally found it. And now what he does is he helps others find theirs and making the world a better place. It's an incredible journey. It's an inspiring talk conversation. Please subscribe and share this. Hello, 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 and welcome back to our Finding Better podcast. My name is John Suzuki, and I am your host. And this is where we share real life experiences of things that we've done to find better in our own lives. Because sometimes, the best way to success is to copy it. So today we have a really, really interesting and wonderful guest. His name is John Graham, and I'll tell you something. After you hear a little bit about John, in my introduction, you're going to understand when I say I am thankful that you've made it this far with us, John, to be with us today. John, welcome to Finding Better. Thank you for joining us.
I'm delighted to be here, John. Thank you.
Okay. Well, let me just kind of get to the punchline in your introduction here real quick. What we're talking about today, this is finding better. It's about finding better in your life. And so what John's going to share is all about taking risk, adventure, and the search for meaning. How cool is that, right? Because we all are constantly searching for our meaning and our purpose. And I'll tell you something, there isn't always just one. But I want to give you a quick introduction so you can understand a little bit about John and his background. When he was 16 years old, John shipped out on a freighter. Okay. Now, most of you folks out there are at least 16 years old. Imagine if you when you were 16 years old, just jumping on a ship to somewhere. When he was 19, he hitchhiked through Algeria during a time when there was a revolution. I mean, seriously, when he was 20, he was on the team that made the first ascent of Denali's North Wall, which is a climb that is so dangerous it's never been repeated. And Denali is the highest mountain in America. It's in Alaska. So 2 years later, he hitchhiked around the world working as a war correspondent in just about every war he came across, including the 1969 revolution in Libya and Vietnam. And, the thing is about John is that as a young man, right, adventure was everything. And what he said is that with each brush of death, if you will, it only pushed him to push the ante and to take more risks. And the thing was to bury ever deeper the emotional life that he needed to make him whole. And I want to talk to you about that, John, because uh, at one point in time that all began to change. So did I did I get your colorful youth right?
Well, John, I've written a whole memoir about it, 350 pages, and you went through it there in about 5 minutes. So that's great. You hit the high points. The bumper sticker I often use to new audiences is, "Hey, I'm lucky to be alive.
No,
Lucky
exactly, right?
to
That's
be
that's why
alive."
I say I feel so blessed that you're here with us.
I, yeah, no, but I figured by the time I was 40 years old, I had dodged a violent death at least a dozen times, just walked away from it. But it was either mountain climbing, where I did a lot of stuff, or in the U.S. Foreign Service, where you didn't say this, but I was not in embassies in London and Paris. I was in jungles and deserts and uh, I was either starting or stopping wars or revolutions, whatever the U.S. government wanted me to do at the time. Um, but here's the point, because your title of your podcast is Finding Better, and I cannot say I was finding better in those years, John. I had,
Yeah, yeah, and I want to talk to you about that.
yeah, well, yeah, talk to me, because what I was finding was that I was absolutely hooked on an adrenaline rush.
Yeah, no kidding.
Now, of course, you probably felt the same way. Many of your listeners today feel the same way, maybe
Yeah.
when they were young, not just men, women too, but
Yeah,
most did in
absolutely.
those days. We took all kinds of crazy risks when we were teenagers and stuff because that's kind of what you did. But I took that to an extreme and did all the things that you described and that are described in that memoir. And as you said, every time was a bigger risk because I kept walking away from it all. So I said, "Oh, what the hell? I'm invulnerable. I'm invulnerable.
Yeah.
No one will ever do me in." And the bullets kept missing, and the avalanches kept missing. So I kept doing it all. That was that came a momentous day, a couple of days, I suppose, when I discovered that I really wasn't finding better at all. I was finding worse. It was during a battle in Vietnam, John, and
So just real quick, John, before you talk about that,
yeah,
and definitely want to do that. But you had mentioned that each brush with death, if you will, kept pushing you to bury deeper and deeper your the emotional part of your life that you said you needed to make you whole. So what were you running away from something, or what is it that was happening that
mm,
that was causing you to do that?
well, I guess I was running away from something, and I'll tell you, I grew up in a quiet little city called Tacoma, Washington,
Sure.
and uh, and nothing ever happened there. And not only that, but I grew up so much, so fast that I was completely uncoordinated. So I was constantly getting beat up by bullies and getting madder and madder about it. And I desperately wanted to be a man. I just desperately wanted not to keep beaten up. And the
Wow.
problem was that my own father, nice guy, I love Dad, but he was a very gentle guy, and he never got into a fight or anything like that. He was constantly being pushed around by other men at
Oh,
the newspaper where he worked. And I felt so let down by that. So I was looking for a role model, and that's what led me to that ship where you started your introduction. I was 16. Actually, I just hit my 17th birthday that week, but any case. Um, so I go on this ship, and in those days, the ships were not container ships. These were just big ships that were run by 30 or 40 really tough guys. And,
right.
and these guys, seamen, were determined to teach me life lessons they knew I would never get in Tacoma or never get in school. And they were absolutely right.
Oh boy.
Uh,
Yeah.
and so I learned this, began to learn this just a few days off from San Francisco. And I was on deck, and another crewman came up to me and began to, make sexual suggestions. And then another guy comes up, a great big black guy, weighed about 250 pounds. His name was Roy. Roy grabs this offending crewman and slams him up against the bulkhead and beats him up. And then there's this most magnificent stream of cussing I ever heard in my life. And it was great. And I realized right then that that's the man I wanted to be. It wasn't my father. It was Roy. I wanted to be like.
Wow.
And I went back down to my room that night and I practiced cussing like Roy, and I practiced pushing people against walls and stuff. And and that really was the beginning of this life of adventure. A couple of days later, we were in a barroom brawl in the Philippines, and Roy again saved my life. He pulled me out of that brawl before I got killed. Uh, but it was a real introduction. And you can imagine this is a bar in the jungle in the Philippines, and it was pretty
Yikes.
tough. I'm not going to go into this is a family channel. I'm not going to go into all this that happened. But let me
Right.
tell you, it was a real opening. And I just discovered that the world was not Tacoma, Washington. The world was
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
big, huge place with all kinds of stuff, and I'd be determined to do more of that. I came back from that trip. I told my parents blithely, Then I was gonna quit high school and go back out to sea because I had seaman's papers. They, of course, said, "No, no, you're not." But anyway, that trip, as you say, was the beginning of a lot of other things: mountain climbing exploits, Denali, Mount McKinley, hitchhiking around the world, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm now in my early 20s. I'm totally hooked on adventure. I seem to be indestructible. And yet I've done so by following models for manhood. And Roy was only the first. Uh,
Hmm. Sure.
on screen, there were people like John Wayne, and
Yeah.
movies and stuff. And I realized, in my ignorance, that that I was a weak person and I needed to toughen up. So I basically hammered boards over my heart. I lost track of my feelings. Everything was about adventure. When I went to
Oh,
Harvard, I
wow.
rode crew, so I put on 30 pounds of muscle. So now all of a sudden I could be a real man. I could really shove people around myself. And I absolutely love the adventuring that happened after that.
Hmm. Hmm.
And again, that was everything was finding better, but meaning finding better adventures, doing more and more dangerous stuff. And every adventure, as I think you noted earlier, just hammered that plywood over my heart more. I was a tough, I couldn't
Oh.
experience emotions, and that's the way my life was until I don't know if I can get into it now, but that
Yeah,
leads
yeah,
into
yeah.
the Vietnam story.
Yes, please.
So there I am. I'm a young man, and I don't know it, but I am a feeling man. I am capable of compassion, but I don't see it because I have totally walled off that part of myself in order
And
to
you're
be,
and you're still in your 20s, right?
yeah, I'm still
You're
in my
still in your
20s.
20s, you're still invincible. Yeah.
I'm still invincible. I've had all kinds of experiences being tough, including being in that revolution in Algeria, where I learned from French Foreign Legionnaires how to really be tough. I mean, these guys were amazing. Two or three of them
Yes.
holding off a whole rebel army with a couple of pistols. I mean, it was just great. So here I am in Vietnam. And I asked the State Department to send me to the most dangerous place assignment they had in Vietnam, and they did. So I became advisor to the city of Hue. Some of your listeners may remember Hue is the site of the Tet massacre.
Mm-hmm.
1968. Anyway, I was the advisor to the city of Hue, to the mayor, and I also had a lot of duties in political duties, counterintelligence and intelligence duties. I won't go into it all. It was all really nasty stuff. Then, before Vietnam fell for the last time in 75, in 72, I was there, and the NVA, the North Vietnamese Army, had surrounded Hue on two sides, and or the third side was the South China Sea, and only the south was the road open south to Da Nang. And the NVA, the North Vietnamese, were within 6 miles of the city. There were no more American soldiers around to protect me, who was technically still a civilian, although I was armed to the teeth. There were no more American soldiers because they were being withdrawn under the peace agreement.
Mm-hmm.
So it was me and three other civilians who were there, stuck in the city. And
Wow.
if the NVA were around the city, we would be killed or taken capture, just as happened during the Tet Offensive. So my life was at stake, and I knew I couldn't be rescued because if the Army did send a helicopter to try and pull me out, the South Vietnamese would be trying to get on that helicopter
Yeah.
too. I'd
Yeah.
have to shoot them off the skids. I mean, it would be awful. Um, so it was a desperate battle. And all of a sudden, in the middle of this, I realized that I hated this war. I knew it was wrong. I knew it was unwinnable. And I began to realize that I was playing a key part in a whole lot of suffering in Vietnam. All these people being killed, North, South, civilians especially. And I was responsible for it. And why? Not because I believed in the war, not because I was, quote, saving democracy, but because of my own need for adrenaline rushes. I was only there for my own ego satisfaction. And people were dying because of the decisions I was making. And I suddenly got all that.
So,
And
so, so, so Okay, suddenly.
Yeah,
What I envision is you armed to your teeth, um, walking through buildings with chaos happening all around you. Tell us what that meant. How did that suddenly happen?
oh boy. Well, it's a long story, but I'll try and shorten it. The key thing was, you're right. The city was in flames. The deserters were burning the marketplace. The NVA tanks were 6 miles from the city gates. The the chances of rescue were nil. Our only hope
Right,
was that the South Vietnamese army would hold off the North Vietnamese, or that American fighter planes from carriers off the coast would break through the cloud cover and blast away at the North Vietnamese. But I could see that the real problem was the deserters from the South Vietnamese army. They were terrorizing the city so that more than half the population of the city had fled south on that one road south of Da Nang. And the deserters had taken control over most of the town, so there was breaking glass and gunshots and artillery booming from both sides. It was a scene straight from like Kafka, straight from the most brutal movie you've ever seen.
and
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 I
and
decided
here
that,
and here you are, no disrespect intended,
yeah,
a white guy in the middle of all of it.
yeah, I'm a white guy in the middle of all this, and not only that, oh, it gets worse. Again, I told you I thought the problem was the deserters. So I scream at the mayor, we got to set up a firing squad and start shooting these deserters.
Oh
Now,
my gosh.
I knew perfectly well, John, that these deserters were not professional soldiers. They
Yeah,
were
right.
young kids, some
Uh,
of them in their teens, dragooned off the rice paddies maybe a month before, given a little bit of training, and then thrown up into the war in the north.
right,
And
right.
so they were frightened and they were drunk out of their minds, and they were the ones burning the marketplace. So yeah, they were a threat. And so I saw that the only reaction was to start killing them, just put them up against poles and start shooting them as an example to the other deserters. That's where I thought we should go, but I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure that would do it. I was just trying to save my own butt.
Hmm.
I realized at that moment, and I'm returning now to what I said 5 minutes
Right.
ago. At that moment, I realized that the war was unwinnable, etc. That I hated the war, that it was the wrong war. And here I just sent, I don't know, maybe three, four, a dozen farm boys to their deaths, or I thought I had. Turned out I hadn't, but I thought I had done that. And all for what? All for just to have another adventure. Climbing a mountain was one thing because I was the only one at risk. But here, all kinds of things were at risk,
Right. Right.
and I was in the middle of it and doing nothing to stop it. In fact, I was doing a lot to make it worse. Setting up that firing squad, for example, when I had no idea what I was doing. So I remember I just put my head down and I think I started to cry even. It's like, Jesus Christ, how can my life be this shallow? How can my life be this shallow? I'm an intelligent, I think, somewhere buried, a caring human being. And yet I'm abetting, I'm supporting this pain. It was the lowest point in my life by far, the lowest, and it was a turning point. It was where my life began to turn around. But the turnaround, John, finding that better life, didn't happen that night. It was
Right.
it was the wake up call, and it took years for
Yeah.
me to get my life back on state. The State Department sent me back to California. Oh yeah, I forgot to tell you. I wasn't killed in the Easter offensive because
Yeah.
that
Oh,
very next morning,
yeah.
when
Wait. So
yeah,
you skipped over the whole part of being trapped with no way out.
that's right. I got to at least tell your listeners
Yeah.
and viewers why
You're
I'm still
here.
here. Yeah, right. Okay, I forgot about that. Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah. Well, the next morning, miraculously, the skies cleared, and a whole lot of American fighter bombers from carriers off the coast came and just obliterated the North Vietnamese troops and tanks outside the city. So they had to
Wow.
retreat. And my life and that of a lot of other people was saved by the U.S. Navy fighter bombers. So I'm, a few months later, I'm transferred out back to California. I have pretty what was then wasn't called then, but now it's called PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
It
Mm-hmm.
was 18
Shell
months.
shock.
Well, it
Yep.
was 18. It wasn't just that bad. It was 18 months of not knowing whether I'd be alive that evening because my
Sure.
work was pretty dangerous. Uh, but it's great because it that year at Stanford, I was sent to Stanford just to chill out for a year. And that year at Stanford also helped me deal with a much bigger problem of all of a sudden my old roles for manhood were bankrupt. All of a sudden, I realized that I
Mm.
had to change my life. I had to find a heart. I had to do something that would make me into a human being. I had to find my life better. And it took, like I say, a long time because there was a whole lot to reconstruct.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, but I went to, I don't know, then they called them encounter groups in California, where you
Yeah.
sat around with other people and you tried to be
Support
honest.
groups today, right?
Support,
Yeah.
support groups,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I began to realize, other people began to tell me that, yeah, you think you're John Wayne, but you're not. You're really a nice guy. You're a really caring person, but it's so buried, you don't even see it. You don't even see it. You hammer that piece of plywood over your heart and you don't even see that there's a nice guy in there. You don't see the compassion. You don't see the caring part.
Yeah.
You've been totally blinded to who you are. And so that's the hole I had to crawl out of.
So I just want to pause there
Oh, please.
because,
Yeah, yeah.
you know,
You can go on and on. You
I think
interrupt.
anyone who has listened to my podcasts will tell you that I nobody has ever rendered me as silent as you have, as you were speaking, because I always have something to say, but your story is just so incredible. And I mean, it literally is a series of miracles that you're still here and that you weren't killed at some point in your life. But a lot of people, especially young people, right? A lot of young people. I think nature blesses us with a level of adrenaline that sometimes makes us stupid.
Mm,
And when we're young, right? And
mm,
for us to learn, for us to take risks, for us to do whatever. And if we survive it, I mean, it's a miracle that anybody really survives beyond their 20s. But but if you survive it, there comes a point in time when more important things start to emerge in your life. And you had to go through a very, very deep process, a very hard, dangerous process in order to get to that point. I'm not advocating that people climb the north face of Denali. I'm not advocating that people do what you do, but I'm just acknowledging that, I think a lot of people will get inspiration and a lot of learning from you, in terms of your journey in figuring out that, you were living as Tin Man for a big part of your life, right? You had actually Tin
well,
Man didn't have a heart. You had a heart. You were just covering
I
it up.
I just was covering it up, and I didn't,
Yeah.
and it's like I was on a panel show once, and one of the other panelists was like taken aback, and not in a very friendly way by my story. And she said, "Look, you just like a Missouri mule, John Graham. You had to be hit across the side of the head for you to get it. Most people who go through that adrenaline rush that you described in their early 20s and stuff." Most people get over it. I mean, they get married, they maybe buy a home, they get a job where they have to show up in the morning, and that teenage I can conquer the world, it gets kind of softens a little bit.
Right.
For me, it was just the opposite. It got worse and worse. So I don't quite follow that path you described because I was really super dumb, and I kept going down this path, and it got wilder and wilder, and every time I survived something, and like I say, I by the time I was 40, I dodged a violent death at least a dozen times. But I just kept going until this moment in Vietnam when I realized that keeping going meant killing people, meant losing my
Making the
track,
world
my
worse.
humanity.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. And
that, it was huge. And you know, coming back to Stanford in California, I mean, in Stanford, California, right? Palo Alto, California, I would walk down the shallow sides of the street in Palo Alto to avoid sniper fire. I mean, that's how messed up I was.
Wow.
Uh,
Wow. Well, and speaking of your story, perhaps people can gain inspiration from your story from the perspective that if you survived it, I mean, with everything that went, if you survived all that, maybe there's hope for the majority of us that don't find ourselves in those situations.
yeah, well, now you have to let me tell the rest of the story because
Absolutely.
at this point, just about everybody viewing thinks I'm a real, you know, blank blank.
Well, let me
I
and
got to tell the story of
let me
what
just
happened next.
let me just make a quick comment, okay? War is hell, folks. It's hell. If you've never been in a war zone, and I thank the Lord every day that I've never had to experience that. But it's easy to judge people by their actions in the past. But for me. Um, there comes a point in time when you find yourself in survival mode. I like to believe that I will do the right thing. I will take the right actions every single time when I'm under duress and my life is at risk. But I've never had a gun pointed at my head. I've never had bullets flying over my head. And I don't judge anybody. I don't judge veterans. I don't judge you, John, for what you did. You did what you felt you had to do at that time, and here we are.
Yeah, but you have stories. I mean, weren't some of your family interned in the Second World War?
Yeah, well,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's not maybe bullets whistling by your ear, but it was a brutal part of Japanese American existence
oh,
in the
absolutely,
United States.
absolutely.
I
And
know that.
there's their own stories, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But
Well,
yeah,
you can have your own hour on the podcast, but you told me that, so I just want to make sure your viewers know that you aren't some, you're not just talking from theory. Your own family has had a lot of pain.
yep,
So
yep.
that okay. Well, anyway, so let's go. I mean, I'm sitting at Stanford and these is a support group, and these people are saying, "Hey, you do have a heart," and I began to exercise that. The first thing was the easiest thing was with my own kids. I had two little kids then, and I began to pay attention to them. I began to be a daddy, and that helped. My own first marriage was by that point irretrievably gone, but
Mm.
nonetheless, my relationships with other people began to improve. I began to listen. I began to look at needs outside of myself and my own home. I began to be a good member of communities. And more to the point, don't forget, I'm still in the U.S. Foreign Service. So I'm back in the U.S. Foreign Service, and I find out that there's a whole lot of ways where I can use my skills and resources to do good in the world. I mean, yeah, I'm like the State Department's fair-haired boy. I'm one of the youngest senior officers in the entire Foreign Service because they love the way that I could do all kinds of tough stuff and walk away from it. So, you know, I had a lot of opportunities, and I began slowly to see that not only could I be a good guy to myself, to my family, to my community, I could be a good guy to the world because by that point I'm at the United Nations. And because of America's indifference to the so-called, we used to call it the third world, the
Hmm.
global, I guess they call it now, they put me in charge of American policies at the UN toward all of Africa, and then finally all of the so-called third world. So I had an enormous opportunity to fight for peace and justice issues on the globe. And because the American government, even though
Wow.
we had a good president then, Jimmy Carter, even though the American government didn't give a you know what about the third world, I did because I'd been there, I'd lived there, and I knew the pain and the suffering, some of which I had helped cause by my actions and my indifference.
Oh
Um,
boy.
I had a chance to sort of turn things around, and I did. I did at the United Nations. I went way beyond where the Carter administration was willing to go. Carter was blocked because he had a lot of opposition to his human rights pushes in Congress because there were a whole lot of racists in Congress, especially in the Senate, that wanted to do absolutely nothing that would help the black and brown people of the world. So pushing as hard as I did could have got me fired, but they weren't really looking. So I did a lot of things at the UN that I'm quite proud of, including being behind some steps that were important in the ending of apartheid, institutionalized racism in South Africa.
Wow. Wow.
If they put anything else on my tombstone, it's like he helped end apartheid. I mean, I'm very proud of that. But that's where my life had turned around, and not only that, it totally shaped who I was as a human being, because I realized as people have for thousands of years before me, that the most important thing in any of our lives, your life, my life, your listeners' lives, your viewers' lives today, the most important thing is finding meaning, finding personal meaning, looking at a mirror in the morning and saying, looking at the image looking back at you from that mirror and realizing that you're here on earth for a purpose. You're not just here to take up space. You're here to do something with whatever skills and resources you've got. And we all feel that way. For me, in the beginning, the meaning for me was adventure and risk.
Hmm.
You and I, many other people, have lots of friends for whom real meaning in life, at least for a time, is gaining money and power. We're all wrong. We're all damn wrong. And what I've discovered in my own life and also through the nonprofit I've helped run for the last 40 years, the Giraffe Heroes Project, is that real meaning comes from service, from giving back,
Yes.
helping
Yes.
solve tough public problems. And
Yes.
yeah, you may want to interrupt here because the Giraffe Heroes Project is a whole other topic, related topic. But that's where I got it. That's where I learned there was a meaning in my life, and that it was from service.
You know,
Service,
it's it it,
helping end
it
apartheid, for example.
yeah, what I think of as I kind of visualize an analogy of your life is that you had all these boards covering up your heart, kind of like boards cover up a well. And one day those boards are removed, and you decided to fill that well with other stuff, with service to others. And you know that it is really interesting, John. I really appreciate what you said, because I a million percent agree with you that you know, we all have reasons. We all want to get things done. We all want to do things. We all want to raise a family. We want to have successful careers. We want to make money. We want to travel. We want to do all those different things. But what I found, like you, is that everybody who has figured out uh, true meaning of what they want to do, or what they're about, is service to others. Service, it's about service to others. Um, True meaning is not about getting rich, but it could be about what you use your money for, right? And in service to others, and taking that gift and doing something with it. And so that is amazing. That is amazing that you almost, it sounds like you kind of turned on a dime and you pivoted. And now here you are, after 42 years of having launched the Giraffe Project. And folks, giraffe as in the big tall animals with the long neck, right? So
Yeah,
tell.
I
Mhm.
mean, I'm sure your viewers have figured this out, but we call it the Giraffe Project because of the long neck. Because
Right.
in English idiom, sticking your neck out means taking a risk. And what the Giraffe Heroes Project does is find people taking risks to do good in the world, not just people doing good in the world. There are lots of things that honor them. We look for people going one step beyond that, who, in order to do good in the world, have to take risks. Whistleblowers, for example, risk their jobs. Sometimes people risk their lives to be heroic. They risk their bankroll. They risk being ostracized, fired. Um, and these are the people that we honor. We call them giraffe heroes. And these are the people that taught me what I was already learning in my own life. That the reason they do it is to find the meaning in their lives that we all seek, but they're finding it through service,
Service
through
to
giving
others.
back. Yeah.
Amazing, amazing. How many people are in that, or are part of that organization?
Well, now it's a really small organization because we do it all from our computers, and we have
Hmm.
a small staff. But in the beginning, it was much bigger than that. And I should say that it was you said I launched it. I have to correct you there. I
Okay.
didn't. My wife Ann Medlock, who was a journalist editor in New York City when I was at the United Nations, she looked around and says, "Hey, no one's telling the stories of people doing sticking their necks out, solving problems." And I'm going to do that. And so she did. And she started the Giraffe Project. And it was all about finding people sticking their necks out in New York City or in the world. And these were people that accepted the risk and just plowed ahead anyway and did what they needed to do to solve a problem in their lives. It caught on. Within a few years, there was a nice story on Anne and the Giraffe Project in the New York Times, and we began to raise. Then I joined her. Oh yeah, I got to say, to my eternal shame, that in the beginning of the Giraffe Heroes Project, I thought it was lightweight. I thought that I could change the world because I have a good gift of gab. I thought I'd change the world by giving speeches, and so I started doing that. In those days, it was the peace movement because it was the middle of the Cold
Hmm.
War. So I thought getting up in front of an audience and saying all my wonderful thoughts would start changing the world. Boy, was I stupid. I didn't, preaching at people to do good rarely works. But what Anne was doing was what people have been doing for tens of thousands of years. She was a storyteller.
Hmm.
Cultures have learned forever that if you want people to behave heroically, what you do is tell them stories of heroes, like Sir Galahad, for example, troubadours in the Middle
So
Ages.
tell us a story. Tell us a story of a hero in Giraffe Heroes.
Yeah, well, there's 1,500 now, over 40 some years.
Wow.
No, wait, I got that wrong. She told me yesterday there was almost 2,000, so
Okay.
2,000. And the one that sticks in my head because it was just like last month is a young woman in western Uganda, in the tribal areas, far from the capital city of Kampala, and she's fighting the whole traditional tribal establishment, which is very, very, very anti-woman. And I
Hmm.
don't just mean depriving women of their political rights. I mean physical violence. Maybe some of
Hmm.
your viewers have heard about some of the physical mutilations that go on with
Right.
women, some tribal societies. So this giraffe hero decided to wade right into this, and she began traveling to these villages run by tribal chiefs who are steeped in the old ways, and telling the women about their rights and urging them and training them to fight back. Then she would spend some of
Um,
her time, and she spent some of her time in Kampala pressuring the president and the Supreme Court to start passing laws protecting the rights of women. Of course, she's taking a risk. The tribal chiefs want to kill her, and they
you
try all
bet.
the time. They try all the time to do her in because she represents an enormous threat to their traditional power. And I think it's a great story. It's a very dramatic story. A lot of our other stories, like here in this country, for example, they may very well entail whistleblowers, for example,
Hmm.
uh, and other people who are fighting corruption. We also honor some young people, even kids, as giraffe heroes. But for kids, it's a little different. We all remember that when you're 9 years old, the biggest risk you can take is peer pressure. Other kids laughing at you. You're not being
Right.
part of the gang. So we include that as a risk for some youngster, for example, that is tired of being bullied and sets up a student court in his or her grade school, or maybe he organizes a Saturday afternoon to clean up all the trash in the school, and the risk is that the other kids are laughing at you. Why aren't you out there playing soccer? Why aren't you out
Right.
there goofing off? Why aren't you out there with your Game Boy? You hear you're picking up trash. Nah, teacher's pet, whatever. That's a real risk when you're 9 years old. So
So so
anyway,
if he when do you find these stories, or do people come to Giraffe Heroes to get help or support? I mean, how do these how do these come to you?
In many different ways. You've described a couple of them. Sometimes people come to us. Sometimes we find them. Something in a magazine or a newspaper or something catches. We also have a nomination form, which is you can get to at the nav bar at giraffe.org, and there's a section up there that says nominate a giraffe and some instructions for what to do. Um, We've
Okay.
gotten bureaucratic so that there's a couple pages to fill out. We want to know what the risk was and how long a person's been doing it. Two main criteria. One, the person has to do something for the common good, not just for their own good or their family's good. And the second criteria is that there must be a substantive risk in their actions.
So these are so you guys collect these stories and recognize people for the things that they've done uh for uh for common good as well as taking risks. What about people who, I mean, do people come to you who are in the middle of something and say, "Hey, listen, I'm working on this project. I'm working on uh, something that is very risky for me and something that I'm trying to accomplish to make, for lack of a better term, to make the world better." Do people come to you for help?
Oh, absolutely. And we have to regrettably say we can't have what you probably really need, which is money. And we're not a grant-giving organization. But after 42 years of doing this, we have a lot of contacts all over the world. And then there are
Yeah.
these 2,000 people already being named as giraffes. So for example, often, and this just happened this last week, a young entrepreneur in Malawi. Again, these two African situations, but they're all over the world. Who is doing path-breaking work, busting up government lethargy in order to do some really innovative, creative work at finding safe drinking water for rural areas in
Hmm.
Malawi. Um, and it turns out that I know some other giraffes in other parts of Africa or
Right.
in the global south that are doing very similar things. So with a few touches of my fingers on a keyboard, I can introduce someone from Bangladesh to someone from Malawi and have them compare notes as to what works and what doesn't work in dealing with recalcitrant government officials who won't do the right thing. So it's putting people in contact. It's also the fact that at 82 years old, I have learned a whole lot about problem solving in lots of different areas. So sometimes, for example, I'm able to coach a new giraffe about how to deal with a conflict, how to deal with a funding crisis, how to communicate,
That's amazing.
whatever a
That's
social
amazing.
activist might need. Sometimes we can at the Giraffe Heroes Project, because obviously my wife Ann Medlock is deeply involved with this. We can go online or have Zoom calls with people, do podcasts, for example, and help people with practical aspects. Although again, we don't have the cash to do money grants.
No, yeah.
We can offer
John,
advice, we can offer contact, and more to the point, we offer exposure.
right,
For
right.
exposure. I mean, I can't
So
tell you how many notes we get. For example, it said somebody in a small town in Nebraska is doing something heroic. Or maybe it's cleaning up a polluted lake in the town, or maybe it's attacking a corrupt city council
yeah,
or whatever. And they think they're alone. They're having a hell of a
right.
hard time getting noticed and getting any traction. Um, so we make them giraffe heroes, and all of a sudden they're online all over the globe.
I love it. I love it.
The all of
I
a
love it.
sudden the Des Moines Register that runs a story on them. So people come up to them and at maybe at the grocery store or the barber
Yep.
shop, and they were, "Hey, can I help? I just discovered what you're doing. I totally agree with you. Here's a few bucks. Here, can I help on Saturday afternoon or
Yeah.
what?"
Yeah.
So we offer practical help. Um,
Yeah.
and we offer, what do you call it? The power of the press. I mean, we are a substantially important, if I may say so, global press organization dedicated toward people sticking their necks out. And
So
so
this is amazing, John. I have to wrap up because we're significantly over time, but I didn't want to, and we may decide to do another episode with you. But what I'm hearing from you is that you are an amazing resource, even though you don't have cash. I would say that people and knowing resources and contacts that can help all over the world can be much more valuable than money. And the access to press and the access to visibility. And so I want to encourage my audience, if you've got something going on, because this is about finding better, right? And the bottom line to this podcast is helping people find better in their lives and make the world better than the day we landed on it. Um, I just want to remind everybody that the name of the website is giraffe.org. And
Mhm.
also, John has written his own memoir, and his memoir is called Risk, Adventure, and the Search for Meaning.
The title is Quest. That's the subtitle.
Sorry,
QUE.
Quest.
Quest
Thank you.
dash
Quest, Risk,
dash.
Adventure, and the Search for Meaning.
Yeah,
And his website is johngraham.org.
yeah.
Um, and so, John, I'd love to have you back sometime to continue this conversation. I did very little talking because your stories were amazing, and what you're doing in helping others in their heroic efforts and supporting them is really, really wonderful, and I love it. Do you have any final words to share with the group?
Well, I just want to congratulate you, John. I mean, finding better is a superb idea. In a sense, you're doing the same thing I'm doing. You're looking at ways to improve life for everybody on the planet. And I think using modern technology and this podcast is a great service. And I just want to thank you and congratulate you.
Wonderful, John. Likewise, this is a mutual admiration society, I guess. And so, folks, share this, because you know what? There are people in your life who are trying to do heroic things and who are trying to make the world better and their own lives better. And giraffe.org, the Giraffe Heroes Project, can be a wonderful, wonderful thing for them. So, with that, please share this. Please share this. John, thank you again for joining us. All of you, I love you. God bless you. Again, please share this, and we'll see you next time with a whole lot more. Bye.